From UFOs to ghost and psychic powers, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Here are the facts. The calendar is one of mankind's earliest inventions and one of its most important. The ability to anticipate the seasons led to the regulation of society and agriculture. Without a calendar, we could not foresee seasonal changes, and we would not have the division of minutes, hours, and days. The calendar is humanity's attempt to measure time itself. Of course, it's not perfect. Throughout history, cultures have created their own calendars, meant to commemorate social events as well as changes in climate. For thousands of years, nations across the world had separate calendars and measures of time. Today, most of the world runs on the Gregorian calendar of 365 days to a year, but other calendars still exist. For example, groups in Guatemala use the Quiche Maya calendar, while the Islamic world uses a lunar calendar and North Korea counts the years from the day of its independence. However, all countries are familiar with the Gregorian calendar and use it when conducting international business. It has drawbacks, but it works well enough to unite the planet. After millennia of struggling through uncertainty, we have finally agreed on the time. But what if we're wrong? Here's where it gets crazy. Some researchers think the calendar as we know it is off by as much as 3 centuries, that somewhere along the line we became victims of phantom time. To these investigators, the years between about 600 to 900 AD never actually happened. Researchers like Aribert Illig and Hans Ulrich Niemitz think this modern age may actually be in the 1700s rather than the 21st century. According to these researchers, the evidence is overwhelming. Let's take a closer look. Even considering we might be 300 years in the past, 600 AD was a long time ago. As a result, physical evidence is hard to come by. To the advocates of phantom time, this evidence is incongruous, unconvincing, and most likely from a different era. They claim the buildings from 600 to 900 AD don't match their contemporaries. Consider the Chapel of Aachen, a building that was allegedly built in 800 AD, but uses an arch that isn't seen on any building until 200 years later, in the 11th century. They believe it is unlikely that someone would build this type of arch independently, and even more unlikely that it would not be seen and mimicked earlier. These theorists also believe that based on the conversion dates of the Gregorian and Julian calendars, Julius Caesar had actually been dead for more than a century when the Julian calendar was introduced. And that's not all. Various prominent historical figures, chief among these being Charlemagne, are said to have been assigned to the wrong time period or made up entirely. The theorists also believe that inefficiencies of dendrochronology, the science of measuring time through tree rings, attributed to this phantom time. To these theorists, the big question isn't if this happened, it's why. Did Otto II conspire to place his reign in the year 1000, a more auspicious time than the 700s? Is Constantine VII's brutal revision of Byzantine history to blame? Or could it all be an accident? We know the search for a reliable calendar has generated problems before. For example, when Britain adopted the Gregorian calendar in 1752, the discrepancy had grown to 11 days, and citizens across Britain rioted, believing these 11 days were stolen from their lives. But to mainstream scientists, the evidence given by these theorists is circumstantial at best. The phantom time hypothesis lingers on the fringe of accepted historical research despite the protest of its champions. Many phantom time theorists believe that the mainstream world has simply decided to ignore the issue, perhaps because of its unorthodox nature. After all, if our modern calendar is hundreds of years off, it will require a profound revision of history. Most of the world does not believe there's enough evidence to support the phantom time hypothesis. But what if these theorists are right? Have we been fooled? Have we accidentally made up centuries' worth of fiction and confused it with fact? Mainstream science refuses to accept the hypothesis, and most scientists dismiss it entirely. Why? Is it a load of paranoid claptrap? Or is there something they don't want you to know?